I'm going live. I am live. Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and I'm here with my friend, Dee Piers.
Hello, everyone.
Of Around the World with Dee and Friends. How are you tonight, Dee?
What's that?
How are you tonight?
Oh, I'm doing fine. How are you and Bonnie?
We're fine. We've had a nice couple of days. Thanksgiving days. Very nice.
Oh, that's good. Very nice.
Okay, so we have 3 topics for tonight. We want to discuss the ICC warrant and the impact of the response to it on international law. We want to discuss the Oreshnik
Mm-hmm.
and whether Trump may be Oreshniked on Ukraine even before he gets into office or even before he gets to deal with China. So that's the second of our topics. And the third one is the issue of whether we have the capability to defeat Russia if we should start a war. Can we win a war against them? What's the balance of capability? So we'll be considering that in this stream as well. There are a number of articles involved. There's an article on the U.S. response to the ICC. There is also an article from Pepe Escobar on whether Trump may indeed get Oreshniked. And there's also there's an article on why the United States will lose a war with Russia. Would you like to start by taking up any of these articles, Dee?
Oh, why don't you start, then I'll take the second one.
Okay. Then I am going to start with the U.S. response to the ICC. How about that?
That sounds good.
Okay. So the first of our articles is from Truth Out. And the headline is U.S. response to the ICC Netanyahu warrant could deal a death blow to international law. And the tagline, quote, the Hague Invasion Act, unquote, authorizes the military to forcibly extract U.S. and allied nationals if they're arrested for war crimes. This article is by Marjorie Cohn, and it's dated November 26, 2024. Marjorie Cohn, for those of you who don't know, is one of the experts on international law who writes for Truth Out. They have 2. She is probably the most senior of these and is a very excellent writer and researcher. This graphic here is the official logo and inscription of the International Criminal Court, an intergovernmental organization, international tribunal seated in The Hague in the Netherlands. And that sign is pictured on September 2024. And the person who got this photo was Nicholas Economou. And it originated with Nerf Photo via Getty Images. This piece is part of the series Human Rights and Global Wrongs. The International Criminal Court's ICC stunning issuance of arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for war crimes and crimes against humanity is a major game changer. After years of impunity, the chickens unleashed by Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza have finally come home to roost. These charges against Netanyahu and Gallant are momentous. This is the first time the ICC has issued arrest warrants against an Israeli official for crimes against the Palestinian people. It is only the second time in its 22 years of existence that the ICC has issued an arrest warrant for someone who is not from the African continent. People were beginning to worry about the objectivity of the ICC because they were only issuing warrants against people from Africa. Palestinian human rights organizations, Al-Haq, Al-Mazen Center for Human Rights, and the Palestinian Center for Human Rights called the ICC's decision, quote, a historic and pivotal moment in the battle against Israel's impunity, which the Palestinian people have been denied justice and subjugated for decades under a genocidal settler colonial apartheid regime, unquote. There's a U.S. history of undermining the ICC. The United States had a fraught relationship with the ICC even before it opened for business in 2002. As President Bill Clinton was leaving office, he signed the court's Rome Statute stating, quote, I believe that a properly constituted and structured international criminal court would make a profound contribution in deterring egregious human rights abuses worldwide, and that signature increases the chances for productive discussion with other governments to advance these goals in the months and years ahead, unquote. But Clinton urged incoming President George W. Bush to refrain from sending it to the Senate for advice and consent to ratification. Bush went even further and, in an unprecedented move, unsigned the treaty on behalf of the United States. Since then, the U.S. has consistently tried to undermine the ICC. That's not only in the presidency of George W. Bush, but also in that of Barack Obama, and also Donald Trump, and finally in the presidency of Joseph R. Biden, otherwise known as the Robinette. In 2003, Congress passed and Bush signed the American Service Members Protection Act, which is known as, quote, the Hague Invasion Act, unquote. I think that act was so outrageous. It says that if a U.S. or allied national is detained by the ICC in The Hague, Netherlands, the U.S. military can use armed force to extricate them. This would apply to close U.S. ally Israel. I think the Netherlands should have replied to that act by breaking off diplomatic relations with the United States.
I agree. It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. And to think that act wasn't repealed by Obama and his administration? I mean, what was he thinking? The Bush administration effectively blackmailed 100 countries that were parties to the Rome Statute by forcing them to sign bilateral immunity agreements in which they promised not to turn over U.S. persons to the ICC, or the United States would withhold foreign aid from them. I wonder if they're going to try to get out of those agreements now that the world is slowly being taken over by BRICS nations. It's an interesting speculation. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune has introduced bipartisan legislation to sanction ICC prosecutors who try to file charges against Israeli officials. 42 Democrats voted for the House version of John Thune's bill. That's incredible. When he was president, I mean, these people have no respect for international law. That's what it comes down to.
Exactly. They don't.
They have none. It's ridiculous. It's shameful. Absolutely shameful. When he was president, Donald Trump imposed sanctions on ICC prosecutors in a reprisal against the court's investigation of Israeli leaders and investigations of U.S. officials for war crimes committed in Afghanistan. Although President Joe Biden reversed Trump's order in 2021, he reiterated the U.S. government's, quote, long-standing objection to the court's efforts to assert jurisdiction, unquote, over Israeli and U.S. Personnel. The Bush administration, which has sent at least $17.9 billion in military aid to Israel since October 7, 2023, denounced the charges against Netanyahu and Gallant. The spokesperson for the National Security Council said in a statement that the ICC has no jurisdiction over Israel, and the U.S. is consulting with Israel on, quote, next steps, unquote. Excuse me, and, quote, the United States fundamentally rejects the court's decision to issue arrest warrants for senior Israeli officials, unquote. By providing military support and diplomatic cover to Israel, U.S. leaders could be charged under the Rome Statute with aiding and abetting Israel's war crimes and crimes against humanity. But the ICC is unlikely to file such charges. Well, I say they ought to file them immediately. Might as well be hung for a sheep as a lamb. Will the U.S. government play spoiler of international justice by invading The Hague to extract the Israeli officials if they are arrested? Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas, responded to the arrest warrants by invoking the Hague Invasion Act. Quote, woe to him and anyone who tries to enforce these outlaw warrants, unquote, he warned. Quote, let me give them all a friendly reminder. The American law on the ICC is known as the Hague Invasion Act for a reason. Think about it, unquote. So says the senator from the outlaw nation. War crimes of starvation as a form of warfare and intentional attacks on civilians. On November 21st, day 441 of Israel's genocidal campaign, which has killed more than 44,000 Palestinian people, the ICC's pretrial chamber one announced that it found reasonable grounds to believe Netanyahu and Gallant were co-perpetrators of the war crime of starvation as a method of warfare, committed from at least October 8, 2023 until at least May 20th, 2024, the day the prosecution filed the applications for arrest warrants. Of course, things have gotten even worse since then, by the way. The chamber found reasonable grounds to believe that Netanyahu and Gallant, quote, intentionally and knowingly deprived the civilian population in Gaza of objects indispensable to their survival, including food, water, and medicine, and medical supplies, as well as fuel and electricity, unquote. The chamber noted the role of Netanyahu and Gallant, quote, in impeding humanitarian aid in violation of international humanitarian law and their failure to facilitate relief by all means at its disposal. In addition, the decisions by the two Israeli officials to allow or increase humanitarian aid, quote, were not made to fulfill Israel's obligations under international humanitarian law or to ensure that the civilian population in Gaza would be adequately supplied with goods in need, unquote, the chamber concluded. They were rather, quote, a response to the pressure of the international community or requests by the United States of America, unquote. The chamber also found reasonable grounds to believe that Netanyahu and Gallant bear criminal responsibility as civilian superiors for the war crime of internationally directing an attack against the civilian population. Crimes against humanity of murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts. Pre-trial Chamber 1 found reasonable grounds to believe that Netanyahu and Gallant were co-perpetrators of the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts during the same period. Quote from the chamber, the lack of food, water, electricity, and fuel, and the specific medical supplies created conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of part of the civilian population in Gaza, which resulted in the death of civilians, including children, due to malnutrition and dehydration, unquote, the chamber concluded. Thus, quote, there are reasonable grounds to believe that the crimes against the humanity of murder was committed in relation to these victims, unquote. Moreover, quote, by intentionally limiting or preventing medical supplies and medicine from getting into Gaza, the two individuals are also responsible for inflicting great suffering by means of inhumane acts on persons in need of treatment, unquote, the chamber stated. And quote again, this amounts to the crime against humanity of other inhumane acts, unquote. The chamber also found reasonable grounds to believe that the conduct of Netanyahu and Gallant, quote, deprived a significant portion of the civilian population in Gaza of their fundamental rights, including the rights to life and health, and that the population was targeted based on political and or national grounds, unquote. Therefore concluded that they committed the crime against humanity of persecution. Netanyahu, of course, denounced the arrest warrants. Netanyahu's denunciation of the arrest warrants was swift and strong. He called the ICC's decision an, quote, anti-Semitic move with one goal, to deter us from exercising our natural right to defend ourselves against our enemies who seek to destroy us, unquote. He denounced the court as, quote, biased, unquote, and said its accusations of, quote, fictitious crimes, unquote, are, quote, absurd, unquote, and, quote, distorted, unquote, adding, quote, again, this is a moral bankruptcy, unquote, and that impairs the, quote, natural right of democracies to defend themselves against murderous terrorism, unquote. And Marjorie Cohen goes on, Israel's claim of self-defense is spurious. In its 2004 advisory opinion on the, quote, legal consequences of the construction of a wall in the occupied Palestinian territory, unquote, the ICJ established the non-applicability of self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter in the situation between Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. Indeed, the Fourth Geneva Convention requires Israel as occupying power to protect the occupied Palestinian people. And it is Israel's genocidal actions, not the ICC's arrest warrants, that are fomenting anti-Semitism. The widespread opposition to the genocide is not based in anti-Semitism, but rather revulsion at the atrocities Israel is committing against the Palestinian people. The chamber rejected Israel's claim that the ICC has no jurisdiction over the situation in Palestine, The fact that Israel is not a party to the Rome Statute is not a bar to the ICC's jurisdiction, the chamber concluded. The state of Palestine has been a state party to the Rome Statute since 2015. The court cited its February 2021 decision, in which pretrial Chamber 1 held that the court could exercise criminal jurisdiction in the situation in Palestine, that the territorial scope of this jurisdiction extended to Gaza and the West Bank, including east of Jerusalem. Parties to the Rome Statute say they would send Netanyahu and Gallant to The Hague. Now, all 124 states parties to the Rome Statute have a legal obligation to arrest Netanyahu and Gallant and send them to the ICC if they are caught in the state's territory. Several state parties, including Canada, Italy, the UK, Belgium, and the Netherlands, have expressed their intention to comply with this legal duty. So that indicates that Netanyahu and Gallant can't go to the UK anymore, or to Canada, Italy, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Amazing. Quote, the states that signed the Rome Convention are obliged to implement the decision of the court. It's not optional, unquote. High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Joseph Borrell, the guy who talked about the garden, in the jungle, and said that Europe was a garden
I hate that.
and the rest of the world was a jungle. Even he said, while in Cyprus for a meeting of Israeli and Palestinian peace activists, even he said it's not optional. It has to be implemented. But if any country sends Netanyahu and Gallant to The Hague, the U.S. may well send troops in to extract them. That would be incredible. Would that result in tearing down the structure, of international law? I believe international law is stronger than that, but it might well take a world war to reinstall the authority, of international law. What I find so ironic, is that after the Second World War, we're the country that did most to build up the structure of international law in the first place. And yes, the ICC came later in 2002, and we unsigned ourselves from that particular treaty. But I think the whole thing is shocking and shameful that we have moved away from international law and from the UN since we started it all. And it is shocking and shameful that we now try to replace an international order based on international law with an international order based on rules, the rules-based international order, so-called, where we make the rules and never follow them.
Exactly, because it's not supposed to apply to us. It's everyone else.
Yes, it's applied to everyone else because why? Because we are the hegemon, the exceptional nation.
Mm-hmm. We're pretty much exceptional right now. It seems that we're exceptional at blowing up the world and dominating the world.
Yes.
We don't want to have peace. We don't want equality around the world. We want to be, supreme to everyone.
Yes.
And take their resources. No discussion, no dialogue.
And we're also exceptional in our degree of ignorance about the rest of the world and what's been happening to the rest of our world while we've been trumpeting ourselves as the exceptional nation.
Exactly. You continue to brainwash the people here. The same thing, when you look at Israel, what they do, the same thing.
Yes, they do the same thing, and we protect them and do our best to try to get others to view them as an exceptional nation as well. Well,
Exactly.
I think this is all very shocking, but let us move on to the second of our topics. Specifically, I will take this from
Okay.
the article, the title of which, and perhaps you'd like to read this article.
Yes.
It
Uh,
is Trump may be Oreshniked on Ukraine even before he gets to China.
that's true. Could be. Pepe Escobar.
Pepe Escobar, indeed, the inimitable Pepe Escobar.
Exactly. He's great. With Oreshnik now entering the picture, everywhere the hegemon will try to harass China, they will also have to face Russia.
And those are, in this image, there is a bear. Of course,
Hmm.
the symbol of Russia is the bear. And we're looking at Oreshnik warheads, I believe those are,
Yes.
up in the left hand corner. And in the foreground, we're looking at the bear holding a container of full of hazelnuts. Okay, because the Oreshnik is also known as English as the hazelnut or the hazel. Okay, please go on.
Okay. When it comes to state of the art Russian weaponry, what the inestimable Ray McGovern defines as the Misimat, the whole hegemonic complex seems to dwell in perpetual stupor.
Indeed, super.
Yep, they have no clue about caliber, Sarmat, Kinzhal, Zircon, or Avangard before they were introduced.
Okay, those I should mention are all Russian. Uh, uh, they are Russian missiles. Okay, either air-launched missiles or sea-launched missiles, okay, or intercontinental ballistic missiles. Uh,
They had no clue about Oreshnik, in quote Hazel, before the 30-minute protocol warning by the Russians, stating a missile test was coming, and it was not nuclear. The Americans assumed that would be just another ballistic missile test, as they happened routinely close to the Arctic. Even President Putin didn't know Oreshnik was ready for its close up until the last minute, and Kremlin spokesman Peskov confirmed that only an ultra rare field circle knew Oreshnik even existed.
yeah, their security was amazing, wasn't it?
Oh, definitely. In a nutshell, the Misimat only sees what Russia shows off. And when it happens, call it a leak proof vow of secrecy permeating the Russian military complex, which, by the way, is a massive state nationalized company with a few private components. And that offers the Russian government, in practice, better engineering, better physics, better mathematics, and better practical final results than anything across the self important collective West. Oreshnik, a kinetic weapons system, is a certified game changer when it comes to military technology and warfare in more ways than one. Actually several. Simple physics tells us that by combining enough kinetic force and mass, utter devastation is guaranteed, comparable to a low to medium yield nuclear weapon, with the added benefit of no radiation.
Okay, so just to say something here, uh, the reason why this is called a kinetic weapon system okay, is that there is no explosive component to the weapon system. Uh, its devastation is based on the kinetic force alone. Its mass times the force which is generated by the rockets, okay, themselves. And that is what is generating the impact. Okay, there's no explosion from it. It just simply penetrates things and breaks them down. Okay, please go on.
Okay. Oreshnik is an intermediate range ballistic missile IRBM under development by Russia along with other systems even before Trump 1.0 pulled the US out of the INF Treaty in 2019. A few concise analyses have pointed out how Oreshnik can be fitted into intercontinental has what italics mind non-nuclear missiles. The Russians are being very diplomatic, not stressing that if Oreshnik is launched from the Russian Far East, it can easily reach most latitudes across the USA.
But I think that paragraph means that the way it can reach most latitudes across the USA by being fitted into an intercontinental missile.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the little twist there.
Okay. Moreover, applying Oreshnik tech to tactical missiles, Putin late last week said that this is already happening. Also changes the whole tactical domain.
Okay, so here I should add something also. The missiles we've been talking about lately, like uh, the J dams, the storm shadows, the attackums, the scalps. Those are all tactical missiles. Okay, they're used uh, not as part of overall strategy, but as aids to day-to-day fighting in warfare. Their explosive power, okay, is limited compared to other things, and they're used to help with the immediate battles and campaigns that various people, okay, are fighting. Uh, okay, so when Putin says that he wants to apply the tech to tactical missiles, uh, he is saying that the fearsome power of that kind of tech would actually be applied in the context of battle for field warfare. And you can imagine how fearsome a weapon that would be. I mean, it won't pack all the punch of an IRBM, but for a battlefield weapon, it would certainly be clearly dominant over the attackums or the storm shadows or the JDAMs or JASSMs, stuff like that. Please go on.
Okay, where am I? Okay. Moreover, applying Oreshnik tech to tactical missiles, Putin late last week said this is already happening. Also changes the whole tactical domain. The new game in town is Russia being capable of unleashing ultra high velocity kinetic weapons literally anywhere around the world. After warning civilians to abandon the area around the targets, and has absolutely no defense against it anywhere. Nowhere to run, baby, nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
It's quite predictable that the woke, arrogant, ignorant Missy Matt, as well as NATO, and the whole brainwashed collective West simply have no idea what just hit them, seemingly out of the blue. To be concise, a system with the destructive power of a tactical nuclear weapon, but carrying the precision of a top sniper's bullet. Ergo, sitting duck, $1 billion aircraft carriers, the whole 800 plus empire of bases, assorted underground bunkers, ICBM launch platforms, naval shipyards, not to mention NATO's headquarters in Brussels, the Aegis Ashore base in Redzonostow, Poland, the NATO Joint Force Center in the Netherlands, Southern NATO Command in Naples. All these immensely expensive assets are fair game for non-nuclear Oreshniks, capable of reducing them to dust in a flash after flying for mere minutes at over Mach 10.
And here we have to add that if these targets were in a systematic campaign attacked, they would destroy the ability of NATO in Europe to respond. All the assets that we use to fight with would be relatively quickly destroyed. They just wouldn't be there to hit back anymore.
Mhm. By now, multitudes around the world are aware that Oreshnik may reach Berlin in 11 minutes and London in 19 minutes. Also, that launched from southern Russia, Oreshnik may reach the U.S. air base in Qatar in 13 minutes. Launched from Kamchatka in the Far East, it may reach Guam in 22 minutes. And launched from Shukota, it may reach Minuteman III silos in Montana in 23 minutes. To quote the epic 1960s Motown hit, quote, "Nowhere to run, baby, nowhere to hide." Graphic graphic proof that the Misimat and NATO have absolutely no clue what hit them and will hit them again. In that in the escalation dimension, it affects even after Oreshnik's warheads reduced a missile factory in uh, Depreshnik
Uh,
to
uh,
smithereens.
that's a real tongue twister. Okay, it's the Dnipropetrovsk.
Yes. And even after Moscow made it quite clear that they don't need nuclear weapons to hit anything they want anywhere on Earth. The Misimat plus NATO in tandem fired ATACMS twice against Kursk, released a PR trial balloon related to the suicidal possibility of sending nuclear weapons to Kiev. NATO warned businesses to enter a, quote, wartime scenario. NATO's armchair admiral Rambau, a Dutch nonentity, advocated preemptive bombings of Russia. Le Petit Roy in France and the ghastly British PM restarted the gambit of, quote, troop deployments to Ukraine. Quote, Starmer later backed off. And last but not least, the liver sausage government in Germany started to draw plans to use metro stations as air raid shelters. All this escalation paranoia sounds like a bunch of screaming kids playing in their dirty sandbox because, for all practical purposes, it is Russia which is now ruling the escalation game. Well, they're all panicking, and I read some of those um, articles about the different Europeans leaders, wanting to preempt, being afraid of Russia, and it's just so ridiculous.
I guess
And,
it is really completely ridiculous.
right, and then yesterday it was trending that somebody was claiming that there was UFOs over Washington, and then somebody else had mentioned that, oh, it's probably China, spy planes, a spy, looking to see what's going on. And I'm saying it could be anybody looking to see what's going on in Washington. So it is paranoia going on.
Yeah.
Okay, breaking up Russia, China is hard to do. And that brings us to Trump 2.0. The deep state has already targeted Trump with a vicious war. Oh, here they're singing.
So, Dee, that sounds like the chorus of the European Chihuahua.
I I know they're singing the song of their ancestors. They should be done soon. Okay, a little song.
Okay, those were the Baltic Chihuahuas.
Yeah. Okay. The deep state has already targeted Trump with a vicious war, a de facto preemptive counterinsurgency, even before he attempts to do anything practical regarding NATO's collapsing Project Ukraine. His ideal off ramp might be an Afghanistan style exit, leaving all the burdens ahead to a basket of NATO chihuahuas.
There we are.
That's right. Still, that's not going to happen. Andriy Sushkintsov is a program director of the Valdez Club and dean of Mijimo's School, Mijimo's, MGIMO's,
Yeah.
School of International Relations. He's one of Russia's top analysts. Shushkintsov released his pearl to TASS, among other things. Quote, Trump is considering ending the Ukraine crisis, not out of any sympathy for Russia, but because he acknowledges that Ukraine has no realistic chance of winning. His goal is to preserve Ukraine as a tool for U.S. interest, focusing on freezing the conflict rather than resolving it. Consequently, under Trump, the long-term strategy of countering Russia will persist. The U.S. continues to benefit from the Ukrainian crisis, regardless of which administration is in power. Sheshkinov fully recognizes how, quote, the U.S. state system is an inertial structure that resists decisions it deems contrary to American interest. So, not all of Trump's ideas will come to fruition. Okay, and that's just one graphic illustration among many that Moscow harbors no illusions whatsoever about Trump 2.0. Putin's conditions for an attempt to solve the Ukraine riddle have been known at least since June. Total Kyiv withdrawal from Donbass and Novorossiysk, no Ukraine in NATO, end of all 15,000 plus Western sanctions, and that's a lot of sanctions.
Yeah.
15,000, that's crazy.
Yes.
And an unaligned nuclear-free Ukraine. That's it. Everything non-negotiable. Otherwise, the war will continue on the battlefield the way Russia sees it until Ukraine's total surrender. Evidently, the Five Eyes, usually only two, the US and the UK, plus minion France, side by side with the most powerful silos inside the deep state, will continue to force Trump to double down on Project Ukraine, which is an essential part of the forever wars ethos. The best he might be able to do is to divert attention from Project Ukraine by accommodating the Old Testament psychopathological genocidals in Tel Aviv, plus the Ziocons Armanda in D.C. That's the Old Testament, yeah. And their obsession of forcing Washington to fight their wars on Iran. Talk about a slightest change of focus of the forever wars. Tehran not only exports most of its energy to China, but is an absolutely essential node of the international North Seoul transportation corridor, as well as the Belt and Road Initiative. This is north-south and east-west crisscrossing Eurasia. That could be the real war of choice, simultaneously against three BRICS: Russia, China, and Iran. After all, the American ruling class is already invested on a do or die hybrid war against BRICS. Still, the Trump 2.0 China face-off will be the forum of the hegemon's foreign policy starting January 20th. Virtually all of Trump's appointments, as misguided as they may be, believe it is possible to break apart the Russia-China Comprehensive Strategic Partnership and prevent China from buying energy from Iran. There will be an attempt to disrupt shipping lanes and supply lines from the maritime Silk Roads in the Indian Ocean rimland to the Northern Sea route by the Arctic, including possible false flags along the INSTC. But with Oreshnik now entering the picture, everywhere the hegemon will try to harass China, they will also have to face Russia. So the temptation to end Project Ukraine and NATO's encroachment on Russia's western borders will always be there in the back of Trump's mind, part of a, quote, seduce Russia to undermine China syndrome. The problem for the hegemon is that the interlocking BRICS SCO-wide Russia-China-Iran strategic partnership do have other kinetic ideas.
So here, Pepe is suggesting that the ideas they have, okay, is to use the class of weapons now defined by Oreshnik
Hmm.
to stop the efforts of the United States and NATO to undermine all the trade routes and the progress, okay, of the BRICS nations towards a better and more prosperous world.
Hmm.
And he's suggesting that the appearance, okay, of the Oreshnik has made the BRICS nations far more powerful, than they were before.
Definitely. And just the reaction we see now, you know, they're panicking. They're thinking we have to act first. We have to weaken Russia.
But I think they have no time to weaken Russia because
No.
I think Russia already has a stock, uh, uh, of Oreshniks. We don't know exactly how many are in that stock, but it's been speculated by uh, some people who are greater military experts than we that Russia may have as many as 20 of the Oreshniks already
Hmm.
stockpiled. And that's enough to ward off any threats, I think, from NATO. Uh,
Yeah, 'cause they don't know how to react.
yes, they don't know how to react. They haven't even understood the full destructive potential of it. Putin has said, since they continue to send in ATACMS and Storm Shadows after the first one
Hmm.
was shown, he has said he's going to retaliate again and that they now are picking their targets. The most popular targets mentioned are uh, in Kiev, the area where the government operates from, uh, Bankova Street, it's called. The new Polish air base, okay, and missile base that was opened up a couple of weeks ago by the United States. The Romanian base, which is also staffed by U.S. personnel and French personnel. There also, that's the base through which the uh, 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 scout missiles, okay, are coming into Ukraine. So that is likely to be a favorite target. Okay, it's also mentioned that there may be a very large factory complex in the western part of Ukraine, fairly close to Lvov, that may prove a popular target. Okay, as well. But uh, the objective of the second Oreshnik retaliation by the Russians would be, of course, to really get the West but to pay attention,
Yes.
because it seems very difficult to get them to pay attention. Huh? They'll give a warning before. Yes, he's going to give a warning before. He said before the next time he'll give a 36-hour warning to allow civilians to get out of the way.
So that's 3 day, wait, 36, 24.
But
That's
36
a day.
hours,
2024 is an hour, 24 hours, then the extra, yeah.
an extra 12 hours. It's
Mhm.
okay. It's a day and a half. Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to go over that in my mind, how much, because they're going to try to, uh, who knows what they're going to do. I mean, the U.S. and everybody with how they're going to react.
Right, but they're going to announce it beforehand
Yes.
because they're quite confident the Oreshnik,
Hmm.
which is a hypersonic missile, cannot be intercepted by the West at all. Uh, and we shall see about that, because giving people warning of 36 hours, the West will have a chance to assemble a defense. And we'll also be able to see how effective it is. We suspect it will not be effective, but of course we don't really know that.
We don't know.
Right? We don't know. Should we go to some comments now?
Yes. Yeah. Then I have my show starts at 9:15 tonight, so
Yes, I know it does.
yeah, just figured I'd mention that.
So it's coming soon. So we have our friend Robert Copeland back, and Evelina's here, and Lana's here. Uh, and I had a comment where I said I have to reboot. I meant to put that in the private comments, of course.
But at least everybody knows.
Yeah. Okay, Evelina says hello. Robert says Russia has yet to defeat Ukraine, and the United States is a much more powerful country than Ukraine. Well, that's true. The United States is much more powerful uh, uh, than Ukraine. So all I have to say about that, Robert, is congratulations. You going to talk about the protests in Georgia? What is going on in Syria? Not tonight, because I don't think it's important enough to talk about here tonight. I think the most important things to talk about are the topics I selected. Okay.
Right. There's just too much going on. It's
Yeah. Too much going on. Only had time to talk substantively about these three topics. But I will be on tomorrow, so I might say something about Syria tomorrow. I still don't know if I will,
hmm
but I think what's going on in Syria is another attempt, of course, by the United States to overthrow the Syrian government.
yes.
I don't think that's going to be successful. Anyway, we continue to go. Alana says, I saw part of the status quo coverage today in New York City for Palestine. Oh, I didn't understand there was going to be a big demonstration today for Palestine. Evelina said, I read they also have the right to bomb The Hague if they see fit. I don't think they have the right to bomb The Hague, Evelina. I think uh, that's just a U.S. act under international law. It doesn't give them the right to bomb The Hague if they see fit. Uh, Robert says, I keep saying a lot of BRICS nations have internal and external problems. One of the biggest problems is China claiming territory that belongs to other countries. I just don't think that's that much of a problem, right now, because I know China is claiming some sea lanes, uh, 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 that belong to other countries. But I think that China claims, okay, against India are going silent the more China gets involved in BRICS and the more India gets involved in BRICS. I think those conflicts have been tamped down considerably. And Status Quo is a much better YouTube channel than this one is, in my opinion. Well, that's fine, Robert. Thank you. I think it's a fine channel too. I just don't think it's very deep when it comes to international relations, which is what this channel has been specializing in, okay, of late. Uh, anyway, Lana says Senator Thune, South Dakota Republican. Lana says, Robert, why are you here then? Robert says, sometimes Joe Firestone discusses topics I agree with, other times he has topics I disagree with, like BRICS being one of them. As you see, I am on here a lot less than I used to be here last year and 2 years ago. You are. Oh, I don't think Robert is being insulting. He's not really being insulting.
No, he just everybody has their viewpoints, and you welcome different viewpoints.
Yes, I do. Robert is having a little fun with me, and I'm having a little fun with him.
Hmm.
That's, that's what's going on.
Hmm.
Lana says, well, either way, being ugly and insulting is childish. Who is Oreshnik? Okay, Oreshnik is the Hazel. It's the name of a missile, an IRBM missile that operates through the use of kinetic force as opposed to explosive force, and is so forceful that it is said to have the impact of a tactical nuclear weapon, but with no radiation, of course, and no explosion. Just simple blowing everything to smithereens.
Hmm.
Robert Copen says, a few months ago, Russia tested an ICBM missile that blew up during the launch of that missile. So, I mean, Robert, that's what tests are for. How many times have we tested hypersonic missiles? And how many times did those missiles fail their tests? I wonder. Okay, and Elihu Eliel says, why is it that within the broader context of cultural perspectives, the Black community appears to be one of the few groups that often underestimates or dismisses the concept of neurological programming as a legitimate and impactful phenomenon? This interplay of historical, educational, and sociocultural factors that have shaped collective attitudes toward scientific principles like neuroplasticity and the ways in which live experiences, and then his statement is cut off. I am sorry to say, because it looks like it would going to be a very interesting statement. Robert says if the United States and allied nations were smart, they would develop the same type of weapons or even superior weapons. That is a very good point, Robert. But of course, uh, uh, these weapons, the Oreshnik, I understand, has been under development in one way or another in Russia since something like 2015. So it's been a long strand, okay, of development uh, that was originally authorized by Putin. he requested something like this. He was smart enough to anticipate that this was a weapon that was going to be needed. And sure enough, it gives the Russians an alternative to nuclear weapons at this time and to manage the escalation ladder with these other kinetic weapons. We, on the other hand, didn't see the possibility of uh, uh, these other kinetic weapons.
And saving lives.
Yes. We also didn't see the possibilities in hypersonic weapons. Uh, uh, we preferred to go the route of ABMs, and we explicitly downgraded the possibility of hypersonic weapons until after the Russians introduced them sometime in 2018. And then we began to develop our own, and we've been testing some of late, but they probably won't be in production for another year. So there is that. Terry Cook says, hi, Terry, we haven't seen you for a long time. Terry says, we're seeing our visions unfolding. Justice is on the way to open the doors for peace and freedom. Every person should have the opportunity to live life to its fullest, especially if you are a Gemini on this day. Oh, gee, a Gemini is in a special position then. We are demanding the impossible. Sets striving is our standard. Reaching is our test resting posture, and dreaming is our waking duty. It's not a very relaxing way to live, but it seems to suit us on days like today. Our united outcry to save our Mother Earth is our future creation, to make. I think one advantage, of the Oreshnik is that it seems like it would be much less harmful to the environment than a nuclear explosion.
Mm-hmm.
Robert says UFOs were thought to be over Washington, D.C. way back in the actually in the late 40s. Terry Cook says, is there anybody here that believes chemtrails are anything less than weapons against all God's creatures? This introduced bill is the beginning. Florida Women for Bernie Sanders was the first to come forward, and why is that? I thought North Carolina Green Party would have been the first, since it was for all to see what the rulers of the world can do and get away with. Guess what, folks? The thoughts and prayers on making things right in a united fashion worldwide is the reason we are. And the statement ends. And then Terry Cook says, is there anybody here that believes chemtrails are anything less than weapons against? Oh, so he repeats that. So Robert says, what does this topic have to do with the average American who are most concerned about healthcare, climate change, Social Security, and paying their rent, just to name a few things to be heard about? So Putin wants to start a war, with NATO. Well, the reason why this should be of concern to the average American is because uh, we have been spending all kinds of effort and all kinds of money and sending in American technicians also to pursue a foreign policy goal which involves breaking up the Russian Federation. We've been pursuing this goal now uh, for a very long time, actually going back a decade and a half at least, but intensifying after the coup in Ukraine of 2014, which we spurred on. This is part of the foreign policy of the United States, and for the first time in 40 years, it has led us close to a nuclear war. That is why it should be of concern to all Americans. So Putin wants to start a war with NATO. I mean, Robert, you've been sleeping. NATO has started a war with Putin using Ukraine. And Robert Cohen, the rebel forces have taken over parts of Aleppo. Rebel schmebel, Robert. Those are ISIS people. Those are Al Qaeda people.
Okay, I have to sign off.
Okay, well, thank you, Dee,
Yes, thank you for having me.
very much.
Uh,
Okay, Dee did have to leave because she has a show now too. So rebel forces have taken over parts of Aleppo. Islamic extremists have taken over parts of Aleppo. They will be quickly kicked out as soon as the Russians get their act together in Syria. Of course, the rebel forces are backed by the CIA. This is well known. The CIA has been constructing alliances with the remnants of ISIS and Al Qaeda all over Western Asia for years now. Don't you know that, Robert? Anyway, I am now going to go to the third of our topics, which is that topic is actually Russia Ascendant, and it's based on an article that appeared in the UN's Review, and that is written by Mike Whitney. Wrote it on November 27th, 2 days ago. And it's called Why the United States Will Lose a War with Russia. It's a fairly long piece, but it's very important. This graphic is one, of course, of a mushroom cloud above. Not sure what city that is. It's a city with skyscrapers in it, though. And at the top is a caption, comment at least. At least we kept the Russians out of the Russian Donbass. Mike says, I never cease to be amazed by the pervasive belief that the U.S. military is superior to any other on the planet. Upon what basis? Oh, I think I'm going to dedicate this particular article to Robert Copeland. I never cease to be amazed by the pervasive belief that the U.S. military is superior to any other on the planet. Upon what basis is this faith founded? The United States has not engaged in any real war since Korea. No one in the U.S. military has any experience with high-intensity conflict. This is from Will Shriver, a military analyst. Here's another quote. If the United States launches a nuclear decapitation strike on Russia that kills President Putin and his generals, Russia has a backup system in place that will automatically retaliate. The dead hand system is designed to collect data from sensors scattered across Russia on radiation, heat, and seismic activity, including a nuclear strike. If the system does not receive instructions from Moscow's command center within a given period of time, the system will autonomously launch 4,000 tactical and strategic intercontinental ballistic missiles at the United States, ensuring the complete destruction of the country and the incineration of hundreds of millions of Americans. Moscow's message is simple. Even if a preemptive strike takes out our leaders, our dead hand will kill you all, unquote. This is from Dead Hand, published by the Planet Report. Most Americans, the article continues, continue to believe that the United States will prevail in a conventional war with Russia. But that is simply not the case. For starters, Russia's state-of-the-art missile technology and missile defense systems are very vastly superior to those produced by Western weapons manufacturers. Secondly, Russia can field an army of more than 1 million battle-hardened combat troops who have experienced high-intensity warfare and are prepared to engage whatever enemy they may face in the future. Third, the United States no longer has the industrial capacity to match Russia's impressive output of lethal weaponry, artillery shells, ammunition, and cutting-edge ballistic missiles. In short, Russian military capability far exceeds that of the U.S. in the areas that really count: high-tech weaponry, military industrial capacity, and experienced manpower. In order to drive this overall point home, I've taken excerpts from the work of 3 military analysts to explain these matters in greater detail, underscoring the dramatic shortcomings of the modern U.S. military and the problems it is likely to encounter when faced with a more technologically advanced and formidable adversary. The first excerpt is from an article by Alex Vershinin titled The Return of Industrial Warfare. Quote, the war in Ukraine has proven that the age of industrial warfare is still here. The massive consumption of equipment, vehicles, and ammunition requires a large-scale industrial base for resupply. Quantity still has a quality of its own. The rate of ammunition and equipment consumption in Ukraine can only be sustained by a large-scale industrial base. This reality should be a concrete warning to Western countries who have scaled down their military industrial capacity and sacrificed scale and effectiveness for efficiency. This strategy relies on flawed assumptions about the future of war and has been influenced by both the bureaucratic culture in Western governments and the legacy of low-intensity conflicts. Currently, the West may not have the industrial capacity to fight a large-scale war. The capacity of the West's industrial base. The winner, this is all a quote, this is all a long quote. The winner in a prolonged war, I'll tell you when the quote stops, between two near-peer powers is still based on which side has the strongest industrial base. The country must either have the manufacturing capacity to build massive quantities of ammunition or have other manufacturing industries that can be rapidly converted to ammunition production. Unfortunately, the West no longer seems to have either. In a recent war game involving US, UK, and French forces, UK forces exhausted national stockpiles of critical ammunition after 8 days. The flawed assumptions, all part of this great big quote. The first key assumption about future of combat is that precision-guided weapons will reduce overall ammunition consumption by requiring only one round to destroy the target. The war in Ukraine is challenging this assumption. The second crucial assumption is that industry can be turned on and off at will. Unfortunately, this does not work for military purposes. There is only one customer in the U.S. for artillery shells, the military. Once the orders drop off, the manufacturer must close production lines to cut costs to stay in business. Small businesses may close entirely. Generating new capacity is very challenging, especially as there is so little manufacturing capacity left to draw out skilled workers from. The supply chain issues are also problematic because subcomponents may be produced by a subcontractor who either goes out of business with loss of orders or retools for other customers, or who relies on parts from overseas, possibly from a hostile country. Conclusion: the war in Ukraine demonstrates that war between peer or near-peer adversaries demands the existence of a technically advanced, mass-scale, industrial age production capability. For the U.S. to act as the arsenal of democracy in defense of Ukraine, there must be a major look at the manner and the scale at which the U.S. organizes its industrial base. Excuse me a second. If competition between autocracies and democracies has really entered a military phase, then the arsenal of democracy must first radically improve its approach to production of war material in wartime. This is from The Return of Industrial Warfare by Alex Vershinin of Russi. Bottom line, the United States no longer has the industrial base or the requisite stockpiles to prevail in a prolonged war between new near-peer powers. Simply put, the U.S. will not win an extended conventional war with Russia. Here's how analyst Lee Slusher summed it up in a recent post on Twitter. Long post on Twitter. Quote, The U.S. effectively had monopolies on many decisive capabilities like precision-guided ammunition, night vision, global strike, etc. I think the absence of high-intensity conflict in the U.S. and other nations had a lot to do with these asymmetries. There was no need for the U.S. to apply mass when its advanced capabilities, or even just the threat of them, was sufficient to achieve political aims. The list of nations with advanced capabilities continues to grow. At the same time, Western militaries and defense industrial bases continue to erode. The West exchanged its large standing armies for a reliance on boutique American capabilities that were once decisive but are now increasingly commonplace. This left the West without its technological edge and without its previous military mass. Those who still believe in U.S. military supremacy fail to realize these changes. Worse still, most of them entertain cartoonishly underrated notions about Russian military capabilities. They fail to realize Russia is both a technological edge and military mass. The reputation the U.S. military had was deserved for a time, but everything changes. This is from Lee Slusher at Lee BT Consulting. Bottom line, Russia's adversaries, Russia, China, Iran, have either caught up to or surpassed the U.S. in advanced missile technology. Unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, electronic warfare, cutting-edge missile defense systems, etc., which is gradually increasing parity between the states while ending the period of U.S. military supremacy. The American century is rapidly drawing to a close. Let's move on to military analyst number 2, Will Shiver, who draws similar conclusions to those of Oreshnik, but from a slightly different angle. Check it out. Quote, I'm more convinced than ever that the U.S. could not establish air superiority against Russia, not in a week, not in a year, never. It simply could not be done. It would be a logistical power projection challenge well beyond the current capabilities of the U.S. military. American air power would prove substantially inferior to the extremely potent and abundantly supplied air defenses fielded by the Russians. Just as the majority of HIMARS-launched GMLR rockets, HARMS missiles, ATACMS missiles, and British Storm Shadow missiles are now being shot down in Ukraine, the vast majority of U.S. long-range precision-guided missiles would be shot down, and the U.S. would very rapidly deplete its limited inventory of these inventory of the munitions in a futile attempt to overwhelm the Russian capacity to keep shooting back. American suppression of enemy air defenses would prove inadequate to the task of defeating extremely sophisticated, deeply layered, and highly mobile air defense radars and missiles. The war in Ukraine has made perfectly clear that all manner of Western air defense systems are inferior to even the decades-old Soviet S-300 and Buk systems that Ukraine originally deployed. And even if Western systems were formidable, they simply don't exist in anything approaching the numbers necessary to provide credible defense in broad scope and depth. To complicate matters even further, scant by U.S. munitions inventory and insuperable production limitations would allow the U.S. to prosecute an air war against Russia or China for only a few weeks at most. Moreover, in a high-intensity combat scenario in either Eastern Europe, the China Seas, or the Persian Gulf, the maintenance demands for U.S. aircraft would overwhelm its proximate supply. Mission-capable rates would plummet even lower than their notoriously abysmal peacetime standards. The U.S. would quite literally after only a few days, see sub 10% mission capable rates for the F-22 and F-35 and sub 25% rates for almost every other platform in the inventory. It would be a huge embarrassment for the Pentagon, but hardly a huge surprise. Simply put, U.S. air power as a theater-wide undertaking could not be sustained in the context of a non-permissive regional and global battlefield against one or more peer adversaries. In Eastern, continuing on with this long quote now, in Eastern Europe, Russia would savage NATO bases and supply routes. By the way, this is even more true after the Oreshnik is introduced. The Baltic and Black Seas would effectively become Russian lakes where NATO shipping could not venture. Many are convinced these are unfounded historical assertions. In my view, the simple military, mathematical, and geographic realities of the situation dictate these conclusions. Those who resist them are typically blinded by the myth of American exceptionalism and its attendant ills to such a degree that they are unable to discern things as they really are. I'm increasingly persuaded that if the U.S. chooses to make direct war against either Russia, China, or Iran, it will result in a war against all three simultaneously. And that, amazingly enough, is just one of multiple hard truths that the hashtag empire at all costs cult and those acquiescing to its delusional designs ought to give more serious consideration as they continue staggering towards the abyss of war they could never win. Staggering towards the abyss, this is from Will Shriver's Substack. There's a lot to chew on here, but in essence, Shriver is weighing Russia's impressive air defense capability against America's, quote, munitions inventory and insuperable production limitations, the combination of which suggests that a U.S. military offensive would likely peter out before inflicting serious damage on the enemy. Once again, our military analyst infers that the United States will not win in a direct confrontation with Russia. Russia-Ukraine, World War III, graphic. Outstanding graphic. Finally, we've excerpted a longer blurb from Kit Clarenberg, who is more of an investigative journalist than military analyst, in a piece titled Collapsing Empire, China and Russia Checkmate the U.S. Military. Clarenberg details what he calls the, quote, unrelentingly bleak analysis of every aspect of the empire's bloated, decaying global war machine, unquote. If even half of what the author says is true, then we can be reasonably certain the United States' escalation with Russia is the fast track to a military catastrophe unlike anything the world has seen since the fall of Berlin in May 1945. Take a look. Quote, the beginning of this long quote. On July 29th, the RAND Corporation published a landmark appraisal of the state of the Pentagon's 2022 National Defense Strategy, NDS, and current U.S. military readiness. Its findings are stark and unrelentingly bleak analysis of every aspect of the empire's bloated, decaying global war machine. Now, the RAND Corporation is the leading military think tank in the United States. It's a nonprofit, but it is a branch of the Pentagon. The Pentagon listens to RAND. Congress may listen to RAND. Its views are considered authoritative. Again, its findings are stark and unrelentingly bleak analysis of every aspect of the empire's bloated, decaying global war machine. In brief, the U.S. is, quote, not prepared, unquote, in any meaningful way for serious, quote, competition, unquote, with its major adversaries, and vulnerable or even significantly outmatched in every sphere of warfare. The empire's worldwide dominance is judged to be at best woefully inadequate, at worst outright delusional. From the RAND report, quote again. We believe the magnitude of the threats the U.S. faces is understated and significantly worse. In many ways, China is outpacing the U.S. in defense production and growth in force size and increasingly in force capability, and is almost certain to continue to do so. Beijing has largely negated the U.S. military advantage in the Western Pacific through 2 decades of focused military investment. Without significant change by the U.S., the balance of power will continue to shift in China's favor, unquote. Quote, at minimum, the U.S. should assume that if it enters a direct conflict involving Russia, China, Iran, or North Korea, that country will benefit from economic and military aid from the others. This new alignment of nations opposed to U.S. interests creates a real risk, if not likelihood, that conflict anywhere could become a multi-theater or global war, as U.S. adversaries are cooperating more closely together than before. The U.S. and its allies must be prepared to confront an axis of multiple adversaries. Commission on the National Defense at RAND. As the Commission report spells out in forensic detail, Washington would be almost completely defenseless in such a scenario and likely defeated nigh on instantly. It's not just being spread too thinly across the grand chessboard. That means the U.S. military, quote, lacks both the capabilities and the capacity required to be confident it can deter and prevail in combat, unquote. The RAND Commission from Washington's Defense Industrial Base, unquote, of Washington's, quote, Defense Industrial Base, unquote, is completely, quote, unable to meet the equipment, technology, and munitions needs, unquote, of the U.S., let alone its allies. Quote, a protracted conflict, especially in multiple theaters, would require much greater capacity to produce, maintain, and replenish weapons and munitions, unquote, than is currently in place. For decades, the U.S. military, quote, employed cutting-edge technology to its decisive advantage for decades. This, quote, assumption of uncontested technological superiority, unquote, on the empire's part meant Washington had the luxury to build exquisite capabilities with long acquisition cycles and little tolerance for failure or risk, unquote. Those days are long over, though, with China and Russia, quote, incorporating technology at accelerating speed, unquote. America's, quote, defense industrial base, unquote, is today crumbling, riddled with a myriad of deleterious issues. To address these problems, the Commission calls to reindustrialize the U.S. after years of outsourcing, offshoring, and neglect. No time frame is provided, although it would likely take decades. We have entered a strange late-stage empire era, comparable to the Soviet Union's glasnost, which elements of the U.S. imperial brain trust can see with blinding clarity. Washington's entire hegemonic global project is stumbling rapidly and irreversibly towards extinction. This is collapsing empire, China and Russia checkmate the U.S. military, from Kit Clarenberg's Substack. Once again, we see the same criticisms. Back to Mike Whitney. Once again, we see the same criticisms reiterated over and over. Insufficient industrial capacity, dwindling stockpiles, quote, insuperable production limitations, unquote, and diminished technological superiority. When we add these to the myriad logistical problems of conducting war in Eastern Europe with an ad hoc army of inexperienced volunteers who have never seen combat, we can only conclude that the United States cannot and will not prevail in a prolonged conflict with Russia. Even so, Washington continues to fire ATACMS missiles into Russia. 13 more were launched over the past 2 days. This was again written November 27th, apparently believing there will be no response to the provocation. Even so, NATO command continues to entertain illusions of victory by pressing for preemptive, quote, precision strikes, unquote, on Russian territory, welcoming the prospect of a direct conflagration between NATO and Russia. And even though both France and the UA threatened to deploy combat troops to Ukraine, thinking the inexorable trajectory of the war can somehow be reversed, It's madness. 5 centuries of primacy. This is, again, quoting from Mike Whitney now. 5 centuries of primacy have produced a cadre of Western elites so drunk with hubris that they are incapable of seeing what is painfully obvious to everyone else, that the imperial model of Western exploitation, the rules-based order, quote unquote, is collapsing and the new centers of power are emerging. It appears now that these same elites are prepared to direct the world into a catastrophic Third World War to preserve their grip on power and to prevent other nations from achieving the independence and prosperity they've earned. Fortunately, Washington will fail in this effort, just as it has failed in all its other interventions dating back to 1945, because the United States no longer has the technology, manpower, or industrial capacity needed to win a war with Russia. It's a whole new ball game. And there is the picture of, I don't know, it's a picture of a rocket. I should say a missile. Okay, it might be a Russian missile, it might be an Oreshnik, but I don't think it's an Oreshnik. Anyway, that's that article. I think it's a fine article. I think it meets the case. I'd like to see an answer to it, because as far as I know and as far as I can see, there is no answer to it. Right now, Russia has far more capability than we have. And when you add the Russian capability to Chinese capability, North Korean capability, Iranian capability, all these nations would be helping each other in case of a war. And you look at our allies, specifically Japan, uh, South Korea. I don't even know whether Taiwan can be counted, because we would be defending them and they have very limited capability anyway. I think we are simply outmatched. The idea that NATO has any real capability in Asia other than our own is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. NATO is European based. That's where its military capability, such as it is, lies. Anyway, I think Mike is right. What we're doing to provoke Russia is insanity. It's insanity. Robert Copeland says, I'm stating a fact and didn't say I agree with them. You are stating a fact. It's correct. I don't dispute the fact. I agree. I agree that Islamic extremists have taken over parts of Aleppo, as they also did previously, but they were expelled before, and I think they'll be expelled again. Lana says, very depressing. Lana says, Richard Wolff said in an interview that there is no discussion by either party that the U.S. is a declining empire. I guess they think if they don't admit it, it's not really happening. Yes, they won't face up to the problems. They won't really decide what to do about it. Now, a few streams ago, I discussed, what Doug McGregor proposes to do about it. He did a rather long article that I went through. What was it, 3 streams back or 4 streams back? But I suggest you take a look at that report from Doug at that stream and the report from Doug that's discussed there. And these articles dovetail completely with the foreign policy that Doug is recommending we adopt. It's a foreign policy that retreats to our hemisphere and builds capability for possible problems we will have in this particular hemisphere. I think his foreign policy is, however, a collaborative one and advocates for a collaborative posture with other people in our hemisphere and around the world as well. And I think that is what we need, okay, to do. So I think I'm just about done now. Thank you for coming today. I certainly appreciate it. I will be back once more tomorrow. I have an unusual 4 streams this week. I don't know why I decided to do that, but I think it's because of the Oreshnik and the need to discuss the implications of the Oreshnik as time goes on. But anyway, tomorrow, at this point, and I may be adding to this, I'll be talking about uh, I'll be talking about what Putin has announced in relation to retaliation strikes against Americans, French, and electric grid targets, and discuss that uh, uh, the Oreshnik, for the time being, has been saved for a rainy day. I will also talk about the Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire and what its implications are, what it means. There's a very good article from Mondoweiss about that. And I'll also be talking about another piece from Pepe Escobar on how Russia and China are rewiring Greek, mythology. And I'm very interested in that one myself. That's what I'll be covering up until the present. I think I'll probably add something to those 3. I'll be on at 9 o'clock tomorrow, so please do come. On Saturday nights, I guess Saturday night is probably the most popular night for these streams. So thank you again for coming tonight, and hopefully I'll see you tomorrow at 9 p.m. And good night, Lana. Thank you for coming as well.